Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our regular schedule of classes. This week's parsha is Parshas Kedoshim, Tavshin Pei Daled, and we will be starting Perek Yutes, chapter 19, Pasuk Yudzayin, verse 17. The pasuk reads, "Le'sisna sachicha b'levavecha." You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Ha'yicheach toichiach es amisecha. You shall surely rebuke your friend. And you shall not carry or bear a sin for it, or for him. Now, so the pasuk here, we're going to focus on the second half of the pasuk, or the second 2/3 of the pasuk, where it says, "You shall surely rebuke your friend." Now, rebuke your friend means that if your friend has done something wrong to you, you should rebuke him. You should tell him that it wasn't right to do. So too, these words, "you shall rebuke your friend," is really the mitzvah that when we see someone that is doing something incorrect, we should point it out to them, and we should try to help them correct it. And then the pasuk says, "V'lo yisisa alav chet," and you shall not bear on it or on him a sin. So the pasuk says, rebuke your friend and don't bear a sin over it. What kind of sin are you going to get? Are we talking about that rebuke your friend and don't get a sin? What sin are you going to get if you don't rebuke him? It sounds like if you do rebuke him, you won't get a sin. You won't bear a sin. If you do rebuke him. But if you don't rebuke him, you'll bear a sin. What sin is that? Or does the pasuk mean something else?
Probably the same sin what he did. If he did something wrong, you didn't say anything. Probably it's.
Then what? He did it already. It's not like you could have stopped him beforehand. He did it already. You're rebuking him for what he did.
Future.
Okay, so what's the sin?
If you didn't say.
What's the sin for you?
For me, sin. He will continue to do something wrong, and I did that to stop him.
So the sin that you're going to get is what? Because you didn't stop him?
Yeah.
For the future. Okay, let's see. Rashi says that actually the pasuk doesn't mean to say that rebuke him so that you don't get a sin, but rather rebuke him and don't get a sin. What kind of sin could you get while rebuking? Rashi says, "Loitalben es pana barabim." Don't embarrass him. When you rebuke him, don't embarrass him. Go over to him quietly, go over to him privately, go over to him in a way that he sees that you mean his best. And that's the way you do it. Because if you go ahead and you do the mitzvah of rebuking, but at the same time you embarrass him while you're doing it, then at the same time you're doing a mitzvah, you're committing a sin of embarrassing him. A person may, there may be a tendency that when you rebuke someone to embarrass them, and therefore the Torah is saying, rebuke your friend and don't bear a sin for it. Rebuke him in a way that you won't bear a sin, which means rebuke him and don't embarrass him. That's how Rashi explains. The Kli Yakar explains it differently, and it's actually more similar. It's similar to what you said, Arkady. And the way the Kli Yakar explains it is as follows. Okay. The Kli Yakar says like this. The fact that the Torah says, rebuke your friend and don't bear a sin, that implies that if you don't rebuke him, you're going to get a sin. Which means that not rebuking will be a sin for you. So the way he explains it is like this. Because we're all responsible for each other. So he's saying a little differently than your Arkady. You're saying that the sin is your sin is that you don't prevent them from doing something in the future. And the Kli Yakar is saying a little bit more than that. Kli Yakar is saying that not rebuking is a sin on your part. Because of the fact, because of the fact that, now again, the Torah gives us a positive commandment. You shall rebuke. But if you don't rebuke, you have to realize is that you're going to bear a sin for that. What does that mean? How are you going to bear a sin for that? I mean, clearly if you have a mitzvah to rebuke someone, and you don't, if you have a mitzvah, if anytime you have a mitzvah, and you don't do the mitzvah, you have not performed the mitzvah you're supposed to do, that's a sin. But what the Torah is adding on and don't bear a sin means like this. The Jewish people, every Jew is responsible for his fellow Jew. Responsible means I'm responsible to make sure that you fulfill your obligations to Hashem. Now, if you lend let's say you lend your friend something, you lend your friend something, and you make a cosigner. You know what a cosigner is? If I lend you money and somebody else says, right, that if you don't pay, he'll pay. Now, if the cosigner sees that the borrower is blowing his money, that gets him worried. Why? Because when the time comes to pay, if he doesn't have any money to pay, who's going to have to pay? The cosigner. If the cosigner sees the lender, spending his money away, he rebukes him, because due to the responsibility that he took, because then he's going to have to end up paying, and therefore he tells him, don't do this. Why? Because if you're going to be doing this, I'm going to be responsible. Kacha arvu shel kol Yisrael. The responsibility that we have for each other, that is what brings about the obligation to rebuke. Now, if you rebuke the person because you're responsible for his actions. Now, he did it. You didn't make him do it. You didn't tell him to do it. But after he does it, you have a responsibility to make sure that he should not, like you say, repeat. He should make sure that he shouldn't repeat the offense. He should do tshuva. Okay, now, and why do you do that? What's the basis for that? Because you have a responsibility. You're responsible for him. You have a responsibility for his actions. Now, if after you go ahead and you rebuke him, he doesn't accept, azaynaku mimenu. All right, so then you're free. Something that's beyond my control. I can't control this person. All I can do is try to stop him. If he doesn't stop, that's not going to be my responsibility. I won't be held responsible for that. But the responsibility of one Jew to the other is that if, let's say, he could have protested and he didn't, then the point is that he's going to get punished too. He's going to get punished. The same way the person gets punished, deserves punishment for the sin, then if you don't take your responsibility for his sin and rebuke him for it, then you get punished for that sin too. That's what happens. You will now be caught up in the same way that this person will be held responsible for his actions and he could be punished for it. You, for not rebuking him after he did it, you also will now be caught up. You also now will be held responsible for what he did, and you can be punished for that also. If you go ahead and you rebuke the person, you told him to stop and he didn't listen, okay, what could I do? But if I didn't even tell him to stop, I didn't even rebuke him, I don't stop him from repeating the sin, I don't try to get him to rectify what he did. So then if it comes out that I am going to be just as responsible for his actions as he is. And I can be punished for that. Mashlu mashal bazeh. They give a parable. This is a famous parable, right? Ready for this parable? A guy's on a boat. Okay, we're not talking about on an ocean liner, right? They're all on a boat, right? The boat is going on the water, and one guy takes a drill and he starts drilling into the floor. And they say to him, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making a hole." He says, how can you make a hole? The water's going to come in. So he says, "I'm just making the hole under where I am. I'm just doing it by me." But of course, that's ridiculous, because what he does by him could actually flood everybody, can cause everybody to drown. So too, one person's actions, right, which actually brings problems and calamity upon himself could actually be calamity on someone else if there's someone else who's responsible for him doesn't stop him from doing it. The same way now his actions, he becomes responsible and he owes a debt for his actions. The person who doesn't rebuke him is also going to be held responsible for his actions. When he digs the hole under him, when he drills the hole in the boat under him, it's going to flood everybody. Now, again, in that story, of course, they're trying to stop him from doing it. But the point is that one person's actions, which affect him, will affect people just as much. And that, what we're talking about means that if a person commits a sin and you don't rebuke him to stop him from doing it in the future, as you said, then what happens is that not only does that bring punishment and calamity upon himself, it actually brings calamity upon the person who didn't rebuke him and didn't stop him from doing it. So therefore, the Kli Yakar understands that what the pasuk is saying is, rebuke and don't bear a sin. Because if you don't rebuke, you're going to bear a sin. And bearing a sin here means you're going to bear his sin. You're going to be held just as responsible as he's responsible for his actions. You're going to be held responsible for his actions. You're not just going to be, I didn't perform the mitzvah of rebuking, but rather the same way he is going to have to bear responsibility for his actions, you will have to bear responsibility for the actions if you didn't rebuke him. If you didn't rebuke him and he didn't listen, okay, then you did what you can do. What more can you do? But if you didn't rebuke him, you didn't do anything to stop him, therefore, there we say, no, then you will bear his sin. Don't bear on it a sin. Which sin? The sin that he did. Because that is what arvus, that is what responsibility of one Jew to another Jew says. That at the end of the day, I am responsible. I'm responsible. My responsibility says I need to rebuke you if you did something wrong. And if I don't do so, I will then be held just as responsible for his actions as he is. So we have two explanations. Rashi says, rebuke him and don't bear a sin for the rebuke by doing it in an embarrassing way. And the Kli Yakar explains that what it means is rebuke and don't bear a sin for not rebuking. Because if you don't rebuke, you will bear his sin. You will be held responsible just as much as he is. Okay, that's the first thing for tonight. And the next thing, so this is Akadi. You got it right. That's how your explanation is what the Kli Yakar says. The idea is that the sin is going to be if you don't rebuke him and stop him for the future. But what the Kli Yakar adds is don't bear the sin means you're going to bear that same sin. That sin you don't rebuke him for, you're going to bear responsibility for it just as he is. Okay. Now we're going to move on to Perek Chaf, chapter 20. And we're going to talk about something that's not something that, typically discuss it, but it's really something that comes out at you when you read this. Okay, so this is Perek Chaf, chapter 20, Pasuk Zayin, verse 17. So this is the section of the Parsha, which actually, at the end of last week's Parsha, we had it, which is what we call the Arayas, the forbidden marriages, either because they are a blood relative to you or a relative through marriage. And here, Pasuk Zayin reads the following: a person who will take his sister, the door of his father or his mother. Literally translates, he sees her nakedness, she sees his, which means they have cohabited. Chesed hu. It is chesed. What does chesed mean typically? Charity, kindness. Okay? That doesn't make sense here, right? It doesn't make sense here, right?
No.
Now let's read further. They shall be cut off in front of the people of their nation. Okay. So a person who, God forbid, commits incest with a sister. This is what the pasuk is talking about. Here, the Torah is mentioning The punishment for doing so was what we call karis. Yeah, we call it spiritual excision, divine excision. Without, what it means at some level, his neshama is cut off, and which can mean that there's a number of ways of explaining what karis is. One way is that the person dies before the time he was supposed to. But what's very odd is the fact that the Torah describes what's happening here as chesed. It is kindness. What does that mean?
Kindness instead shame.
Why?
No,
Okay, so Rashi explains. Rashi is definitely bothered by this question. And Rashi explains chesed means Lashon Arami cherpa, Aramaic for shame, is chisuda. Meaning it doesn't mean kindness here. It means it's actually the Torah is using Aramaic, even though it doesn't say chisuda, it doesn't say, the same way the Aramaic word says it. Okay. The word for cherpa, for shame in Aramaic is chisuda, and therefore, so chesed here doesn't mean kindness. I mean, it's the form of the word chesed is typically used to mean kindness, but in this case, the Torah is kind of using the Aramaic form to say that it's shameful. Now, actually, when we talk about Aramaic translation, we typically look at the Onkelos. And Onkelos, when he uses the word kolonahu, that means it's a shameful thing. It's a disgrace. Yeah, so he does use the word chisuda, he uses the word kolona. When we have what's called, now there's another Aramaic translation, which is Yonasan ben Uziel. And Yonasan ben Uziel, the word that he uses there is arum chista avadis. Chista, that's the word that he uses. Now again, Rashi tells us chista is another Aramaic word for shame. So Rashi says, Onkelos says, Yonasan ben Uziel says, which would be the pshat, the basic interpretation, the simple interpretation, although it's a strange word to use, but the simple interpretation here is the word chesed doesn't mean kindness, it means shame. Okay, but the obvious question is, why use this word to say shame? Why use this Aramaic form? And it's not even using the full Aramaic form, it's using the Hebrew form, but it means to use it in an Aramaic way. Why do it that way? So therefore, Rashi says, Umidrashay. There's a midrashic interpretation, meaning the pasuk is alluding to something else. And here it goes. Im Toimar, if you can't marry your sister, Kayin asach, the Medrash says Kayin, right? Adam had two sons. Kayin and Hevel, right? Those were Adam's first man's two sons, Kayin and Hevel. All right. Now we know Kayin killed Hevel.
Yeah.
But then Cain went on to live a life. Who did he marry? Who did he marry?
His sister.
His sister. His sister, right? So you're going to say, if you're going to ask that if the Torah doesn't want a person to marry a sister, Cain married his sister.
But he doesn't have choice.
1 second. What'd you say?
He has choice.
Okay, 1 second. On that, the Medrash says, Chesed asa amakim, livnais elamim mimenu. Hashem did a kindness to build his world from him. Shenemar olam chesed yibana. The Torah is built on chesed, on kindness. So the wording of the Medrash is, let's just get the wording. The wording of the Medrash is, the point of the Medrash is, and the wording of the Medrash is that why did the Torah use the word chesed? Because it's trying to allude that there is an aspect of chesed here. Not in the sin that you do, but there was a chesed in this kind of a marriage, in this kind of a union. Where was that chesed? By Cain. Because by Cain, the world was able to be built. Right? I mean, we know that Adam had another son too, Shais, afterwards. But Cain was, the son of Adam. From him, the world built up. And the Torah is saying, chesed asak amakim. Hashem did a kindness to allow Cain to marry his sister in order to build up the world. So what's your question? Why is it called a kindness? What kind of kindness? Do you have a choice? You're saying, right?
Kind doesn't have choice.
Excuse me?
Kind doesn't have another woman.
I'm not sure what you mean.
During the life of Cain, where is another woman?
Right. So there, and your point is what? Who do you have a choice?
No,
What else was he going to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
And therefore, to say it was a chesed seems to be problematic. You wouldn't call that a chesed.
No.
It's like the question is, the Torah doesn't want a person to marry a sister. So how did Cain marry a sister? The answer is, well, Hashem let it so that the world can be built, because otherwise it wouldn't be a world. But again, but you're calling that a kindness? And the truth is that if the question was, if the question was, Torah doesn't want you to marry your sister, how did Cain? Well, the answer is there was no choice. That's the simple answer. And we're saying, but that's not the wording. That's not the words of Rashi. The words of Rashi are chesed. Calls it a kindness. So I was thinking that, we take the word chesed to mean kindness, because chesed is something that we usually mean to say that it's not something that I have to do. And I went ahead and I helped the person. A person needed help and I helped them. And typically a kindness means, there wasn't some other outstanding obligation that I had to this person. But I helped him because I helped him. He's a human being. Hashem wants us to be kind, and I helped him out. But chesed, in essence, means giving. Chesed means you're giving. So it could be that what it means here to say is that we're calling it a chesed means to say that although the Torah clearly doesn't want brother and sister to in any way form a union, but in the case of Cain, the Rebbeinu Shalom did it in order to give. What was the Rebbeinu Shalom going to do? Stop. The Rebbeinu Shalom made man, right? And he made man and woman. Man and woman had children, right? So did Hashem create the world just to stop there? Hashem created a world in order to give. The Rebbeinu Shalom created the world. The commentaries say that we can never know why the Rebbeinu Shalom does anything, but we are given an idea, a concept, somewhat of an insight into what Hashem wanted to do, and that is that Hashem created the world lahetiv, to benefit, to give, to do good for others. The Rebbeinu Shalom didn't want to just be by himself in a certain way. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants lahetiv, to give, to benefit, to give to others from himself. Okay, well, that wasn't just going to stop by Adam and Chava and his children. It was meant to be, Rebbeinu Shalom wants to give to more and more creations, and not just to animals. He wants to give to people. In order for him to be able to continue the giving that he created the world for, he therefore allowed Cain to marry his sister. So if you want to know why, if the Torah doesn't want a brother and sister to marry, how did Cain marry his sister? The answer is because Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to propagate the world more because he wants to give more. He wants to give to more creations. He wants to give to more people. And therefore, when it came to Cain, he therefore married his sister. I mean, don't look at it just as, well, you don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. Stop there. Let it just be Adam, Chavan, Cain, and Abel. Maybe that should be enough. The answer is no. That's not going to be enough. The Rebbeinu Shalom didn't create a world. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to populate the world. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants to people around, wants to have people to benefit. And therefore, even though Hashem doesn't want a brother and sister to marry, in the case of Cain, that's what he allowed in order to be able to continue giving to more and more people.
But Cain didn't know anything about what is wrong is right. This forbidden marriages is like it's much later.
Okay, but the point is that we know, as we mentioned many times before, that Adam knew the Torah, Abraham knew the Torah, and we know that they kept the Torah as much as they could. And therefore, Cain is not even though Cain did something wrong, doesn't mean that Cain was a nothing. Cain was Adam's son. So the same way Adam knew what Hashem wanted, Cain knew what Hashem wanted too.
And killing his brother.
That was definitely wrong, but it doesn't take away from the fact that he didn't know other things. It's a good question you're asking. But the question is not because it's before the Torah. That's not a question. Because we know Avraham knew the Torah, and Yitzchak knew the Torah, and Yaakov knew the Torah, and they kept the mitzvahs even though they didn't have to. So to ask the question about the fact that, Cain was before, that's not a question. Now you have a different question, right? The same Cain who murdered his brother is gonna be worried about who he's marrying his sister. Okay, maybe it's an interesting point to make. It's an interesting point to think about. But the fact that it was before the Torah was given, that's not a question. Okay, now so Rashi explains that the Torah, when it says chesed, it's a kindness. It means, in the simple interpretation, it means it's a shame, it's a disgrace. But using the word chesed means to allude to what the Medrash says is that there is an aspect of kindness that was present in such a union, which is the situation of Cain and his sister. Okay, the Ramban, Nachmanides, says something else. Ramban says that the word chesed here means chesed. Means kindness. But it doesn't mean the act is kindness. Rather, the pasuk means like this. It says, a man who takes his sister, okay, and he cohabits with her. Chesed, he is supposed to be kind. Shouldn't be cohabiting with his sister. You take care of his sister. Right? That's what siblings are supposed to do. They're supposed to be kind to each other. They're supposed to take care of each other. If you have a sister, then what should you be doing for her? Help find her husband. By going ahead and taking her for a wife for yourself, then actually you've gone against what a brother is supposed to be, what a sibling is supposed to be. Chesed who is not going back and saying that when he marries her, he did a chesed. But rather it means a man who took his sister, chesed, he is supposed to be kindness. It's going back on the person. He is supposed to be kind. He's supposed to be happy to get married to somebody else. And he didn't do that. And she went along. Because we're talking about v'nich rasu, they will be cut off means they're both intentional. But the point of chesed isn't meaning to say that what's being done here is an act of kindness. But chesed, says the Ramban, means it's going back on the person. This same person who took his sister, chesed, it doesn't mean what he did was chesed, but chesed, he's supposed to be doing kindness. To who means him? This person who took his sister as a wife, he is supposed to be chesed. He's supposed to be kind. As a brother, as a sibling, he's supposed to be helping her out to find the right husband. And instead, he takes her for himself. So again, the chesed is not going back on the act; it's going back on the person. It's going on the person to say, "Chesed, you're a person of chesed. You're kindness. He is kindness. He is supposed to be performing a kindness with his sister to find a husband, and he didn't do that. Instead, he corrupted her. He violated her. Instead of being kind to her the way he should have been." And the Ramban says that to say the word chesed here means corruption. He says the word chesed is used in the Torah in a positive way. That's how it's used. In the Torah, when you're going to find chesed, chesed is a word that's used in a positive way. Hashem is called Rav Chesed, abundant in kindness. So to say that it can also be used to mean something derogatory. It's also used to mean something shameful. The Ramban says that's not how the word chesed is used. And to go start saying, well, we mean the Aramaic form, he says that he finds that very difficult because the word chesed as is means kindness. And you're saying, well, in this context, it's kind of a bit of a corruption of the Aramaic word for shame. He's not comfortable with that. And therefore he said it means kindness, but it doesn't mean the act. It's going on the person. He's kind. He's kindness. He's supposed to be a kind and giving and helpful brother and finding her a man to marry. And instead, he corrupted and violated her. There is a commentary called Haksav HaKabbalah that wants to answer this Ramban's question. That to use the word chesed, he says, the word chesed is always used in a positive way. It means kindness. It means giving. So how do you say now that it could also be used in a negative way? So listen to this idea. Listen to this idea.
From Kabbalah?
No. It's just called Haksav HaKabbalah. It's not Kabbalah.
It's not Kabbalah.
No. So he says like this. Yeah. Chesed is very positive. When I help you, when I'm kind to you, right, that's very praiseworthy. But when you're on the receiving end of kindness, how do you feel? You can sometimes feel very embarrassed from it. You need a favor, right? You need a favor from the person. But a lot of times when you have to take a favor from someone, you feel bad. You feel a little bit ashamed that you can't take care of yourself. So even in kindness, there is an aspect of, yes, praiseworthiness from the giving aspect, but from the receiving aspect, it's not wrong to receive, but there is sometimes shame in receiving. There's sometimes embarrassment in receiving. So therefore, in chesed itself, you have both. You have the praiseworthiness of the giving, and you have the shame of the receiving. And therefore, says the Ksav HaKabbalah, it's not so difficult to use the word chesed and to use it in a negative form and to say shame, because in every kindness there is the aspect and the possibility of shame on the receiver's point. And therefore, the word chesed could be used. So yes, the word chesed is typically used in the Torah in a positive form. But even in a positive form, there's a possibility of shame on the receiver's end. And therefore, the word chesed can be used to mean shame. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful evening.
Especially if people, ordinary people who